Hello, beautiful humans. Happy Monday. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever time it is where you are. Welcome. I appreciate you being here. Thank you for your patience as I tried to arrange some dinner for my kiddos and tried to squeeze in some last minute things here before I go and recap the closing arguments in the Lori Vallow Daybell trial. Now, I will tell you, it was a very long closing argument from Trina Kay, followed by Lori's, followed by a lovely, excellent, wonderful, impactful rebuttal by Trina Kay. I am going to begin with the end. For those of you who are here just for a recap of the day, and especially those of you who are here because you didn't want to listen to Lori's voice in court, I listened so you didn't have to. But I want to begin with the end so that I put all of the news up front and then go back and recap everything that we went through today. So just so that you know, this morning Lori did rest in the case. She rested in front of the jury. She had a couple of other things she wanted to talk about, but we can go over that later. And then they went over the jury instructions, followed by a break for lunch. After lunch, Trina Kay did her closing, Lori did hers, and then there was a rebuttal. Now, at the end of the day, there are 14 jurors. Only 12 of them can deliberate in this case. So the judge chose two random numbers out. It was juror 14 and juror 5. Neither of those were females. So both females on the jury get to stay to deliberate. And then the jurors went back for deliberation. And what I'm being told is that they deliberated for approximately 10 to 15 minutes and then came back out and left for the day. Now, I know there's some conflicting info on this because even now, as I go over to the Law and Crime Network, they've got the verdict clock running over there and they're at 25 minutes. Some people have said that it was possible it was only the alternates who went home. But I actually texted very briefly with Grayson, who's the producer over at Hidden True Crime, and she confirmed with me that they did go home. The entire jury went home. She said, yes, they went back for maybe 5 to 10 minutes and then came out to go home for the day. So I'm guessing that they probably very briefly chose a foreman and then took off for the day. That was a lot of information to absorb. Trina Kay's closing argument was very well laid out. She had a whole PowerPoint presentation. She replayed certain videos of testimony during the trial. And then it was just a lot. It was a lot of information to absorb. So from what I understand, multiple sources are reporting that the jurors have gone home for the day. So I believe this verdict clock over here at Law and Crime may be just a ruse for them to keep their 11,000 watchers hanging on. So I'm hoping that we're not wrong. I've checked in multiple different places about this. And I want to say I believe that the full jury has gone home. Now, I also want to mention that after the jury was excused, the judge asked Trina Kay about the state proceeding with the aggravation phase of the trial. And I just wanted to let you know that basically the aggravation phase is a time where Trina Kay, the state, can produce evidence or they can produce factors that would warrant a stronger sentence for the defendant. And there are several aggravating factors that have to be present in order for them to consider this harsher punishment for conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. So this is interesting because we've been told before by the state that even if there's a guilty verdict here, they're not going to sentence until after the Brandon Boudreaux trial is over, and then they will sentence concurrently, regardless of what the verdict is in that trial as well. So I don't know if the aggravation phase will happen immediately after the verdict is read or if it will happen later during the sentencing, but they're at least putting a bookmarker in here and holding space that they want to do an aggravation phase. So basically, if she's found guilty, then the prosecution will present evidence of the aggravating factors, which can include things like the crime was particularly heinous or cruel or depraved. They can say that the defendant committed multiple crimes or has a history of criminal behavior. It'll be interesting to know if they can, now that if she is convicted and found guilty, it'll be interesting to know if they can bring in her other convictions. They can also say if the crime was motivated by financial gain or other malicious intent, which in this case, we know that that's what the state has argued. And then the victim themselves was particularly vulnerable, or the crime had a significant impact on others, like family members, for example, J.J. Tylee Colby losing their dad there. So in this particular case, they might emphasize premeditation, financial motive, et cetera, and then the religious beliefs. And then the defense can present mitigating factors to counter that of the state, such as a lack of criminal history. Well, that's not going to come in. Mental health issues. Well, we know Lori doesn't want mental health to come in. Evidence or remorse or cooperation with authorities. She did a lot to say that they cooperated with everything in the case, but there is no evidence of remorse so far. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not they will talk about these aggravating factors in this phase, or if they'll wait until the end of the next trial. And which jury it's going to be, this jury or the other jury, that's going to be the one that determines her sentence and whether or not the aggravating factors will come into play in the sentencing. So yes, there will be a completely new jury for the Brandon Boudreaux trial. They've already talked about sending out those jury questionnaires somewhere around the 21st of May. So I just wanted to sort of recap that before I get back into digging into the closing arguments. So for those of you who have already watched them, this is obviously going to be a repeat, and thanks Tim Rathbone for that encouragement. But for those of you who didn't watch the recap, didn't watch the actual arguments, or didn't want to dig into it, this is going to be just as my days in court were. I took detailed notes as much as I could. I do have the video up so that I can play certain things for you, because there are a couple of places where I want to play things that Trina K referenced in her closing. And yes, Jody Parker, the judge ultimately determines her sentence, but the jury gets to consider whether there are aggravating factors. And so they either get to determine, yes, there were aggravating factors, or no, there weren't. So thank you for this, Mimi of 8, that Court TV said the jury went home and court will be back at 10:30 tomorrow. I'm going to reconfirm that time, because that's been what we've typically done. But again, the jury foreman is the one that gets to decide the schedule of deliberation. So it'll be interesting to know if they're going to come back any earlier. You can make sure to watch my channel. I will have a live stream programmed for the time that they're going to begin deliberations. I generally will start about 15 minutes earlier than the delayed time. So for example, if they're starting at 10:30, we won't get the feed until 11 Arizona time, but I'll start at about 10:45 just to do some recaps, answer a few questions before the feed starts. Now, if all they're going to do is deliberate tomorrow and we're on verdict watch, then most likely I will just replay some things from the trial while we chat here. And also I might bring in some guests who can come in and comment. I'd love to have Kresha back a little bit to comment. I'd love to have Joe Schmo, who is there in the courtroom. And I'd love to bring on John DeLynn from Mormon Stories and have him talk about the Mormon angle. So Maria Howard asks about 5-minute delay. That doesn't happen until the actual verdict is played. So once the jury comes back into the courtroom and says, we have a verdict, that feed will be on a 5-minute delay, but we're on a 30-minute delay continuously until they come back and they say they've got a verdict. So now to get back into, to go to Trina K's closing argument. She did an excellent job. She had a PowerPoint presentation there for the jurors with sort of timelines, recaps of texts. She replayed some of the testimony that was given. Victim statements come in at sentencing. And then I want to show a couple of clips of what Trina showed the jury, what Trina K showed the jury. I feel like it's weird for me to call her by her first name. I have met her, I've spoken with her, but I'm not that familiar with her. So I always want to say the prosecutor, or I want to say her full name. Trina K began her closing argument by saying everyone knew about this crime. She references the text to Chad Daybell 5 days after Charles was shot, that she found out she wasn't receiving the life insurance policy, and it was a spear to her heart. This text we've heard many, many times. And Trina K notes that Chad Daybell and the money were the motive. And then 7 days later, she sends a text to Alex Cox talking about the life insurance again. And the text says, maybe it was Ned before we got rid of him. And the we was Lori and Alex. Then she talked about Adam. Adam knew of her beliefs. He knew that Lori was saying that Charles was possessed by this evil spirit. Then she talked about the awkward dinner before the murder, where Alex Cox was talking to Lori's friends, including Christina, and saying that he just wanted to kill Charles. And at that dinner, that Lori Vallow admitted that she was drugging Charles Vallow, and that there seemed to be no recognition of remorse or no recognition that anything that they were doing was wrong. Then Trina K brings up the testimony of Nancy Jo Hancock, telling Charles why don't you just tell Lori Vallow that you changed the beneficiary for the life insurance money. Then Trina K brings up the be like Nephi concept and that text. So she sort of recaps it. And then she tells the jury, I want to break this up into 3 sections for you. I want to talk about the timeline and the motives and the evidence. And then secondly, I want to talk about the jury instructions and the evidence that applies to those instructions, talking specifically about the law. And she says what Lori Vallow said in her opening statement was not evidence. Her comments are not evidence, and she did not present the evidence that she promised to present. And then finally, she wants to talk about the justifications and the defenses that Lori made to try and say, this was self-defense, this was justified. So in this first part, in the timeline, she is very clear to say the execution of Charles Vallow. They began planning this back in June when Charles found the famous KK Walker email, June 29th or 30th. That email changed everything about the way that Lori and Chad talked to each other, and it changed everything about the way that Charles began to think of Lori. On the 9th of July, that's the first time that we know that Charles is coming back to Arizona after moving to Houston. And at 1:13 p.m. that day, the flight was booked for Adam to come and join him there. And at 1:21, Adam calls Alex to ask if he can stay there. Then this sort of clears up a little bit. The question that so many people have been asking is that how did Lori and Alex find out about the intervention? And there's been a lot of speculation about how this came about. I addressed this in the conversation that I had with Kresha K last Friday. There's that video is out there. But basically, Lori told Chad that there was going to be an intervention. I think what happened, me personally, what I get out of all of this is that when Adam called Alex to tell Alex that he was coming into town and asked to stay with him, I think Alex put 2 and 2 together because Alex already knew that Charles was coming into town. I'm sure that Alex and Lori had a conversation about it. This is when Lori sent the text of, "It's all coming to a head. I'm going to need you to stay close." That's when that happened. So Lori texted and called Chad and started to round up the troops, how to get everybody together. All of those texts between her co-conspirators, Summer, Melanie, trying to say that Charles is coming into town, Adam is coming into town, and we know she believed that there was going to be some kind of intervention. I think Adam spoke about having a family dinner to talk to Lori about her beliefs. And I think that everybody sort of in that little circle determined that was an intervention, and that's what's going to happen. So that was Lori's word, intervention. I believe she was the one who came up with that word to describe what was going to happen. Summer gave Lori an out. She said, "Stay at my house. Why don't you just go there and pretend like, you're not even there. Nobody will know you're at my house. You don't even have to worry about it." And she didn't take that out. And then Alex came to stay at her house with a gun, and I thought this was hilarious, and a garbage bag full of underwear. And that was basically how she referred to Alex. And that really was what it was. He brought a duffel bag with a box that was not locked. It had a loaded gun in it. It had extra magazines and ammunition in it. And that was all contained neatly in a duffel bag. And then there was also this random garbage bag of clothes that Alex brought over. And I love that Trina K characterized that as a garbage bag full of underwear. Then on the 11th, Lori Vallow starts very early in the morning talking with Chad. And then this is where Trina K shows the timeline to the jury. So I want to see if we can get a glimpse of this here, what Trina K showed to the jury, because I think it's really important that they got to see this. From my years in the classroom, I can tell you that the research shows that when you hear something, you listen to it, you can absorb about 80% of it, depending on how long that lesson is. But if you see something and hear something, for example, if you put a visual up on the screen, like Trina K did here, and you put visuals and audio along with your lecture, that time increases to about 90% retention after 45 minutes. And what is difficult is that Trina K went on for a lot longer than that. About an hour and a half, if I remember correctly. Does anybody have an exact time? I don't know exactly. I think this is the correct thing. So yeah, these guys over here at Law and Crime are still showing that they're on verdict watch, which I think is kind of funny. So this is what got shown to the jury. This is part of it. The whole timeline of the July 11th. Yeah, an hour and 45. That is a long time. She said it was going to be about an hour. It was an hour and 5. So we see this timeline, July 11th. And she actually started out earlier than that. This must be like the second slide that she had there, because she starts out by saying, Adam sent a text to Charles Vallow around 7:48 in the morning, and it was read around 12:13 p.m. after Charles had already been shot. Then Lori Vallow takes JJ to school, but keeps Charles's phone. Oh, no, sorry. Rewind. Lori Vallow says to Charles, when Charles gets to the house, Lori says, "Why don't you just take JJ to school?" But she keeps his phone, which keeps him there for 12 minutes. And she's going to refer to this 12 minutes over and over. This is really important. Lori says in her interview with Detective Inclan that Charles was being jerky. I don't remember her using that specific word. I'll have to go back and look. But for that 12 minutes, she says that Charles is yelling and screaming at her, chasing her around. Why didn't she just give the phone back? And then after Charles's phone leaves the residence, there are 2 phone calls between Alex and Lori at 7:52 and at 8:06 in the morning. And with all of those cell phones around, Alex had a phone, Lori had 2 phones, Lori had Charles's phone. Nobody called 911. Nobody. Um, 47 minutes go by. 47 minutes go by. While Charles lay dying on the floor, we know that he was still alive and able to move, at least for a little while, because he put his hand to the wound on his chest. He was still able to move. But for 47 minutes, nobody called 911. Then at 12:36, which is where this timeline here starts, all 3 phones, Alex's phone, Lori's phone, and Charles's phone, are at Alex's house in Santan. At 12:39, Lori calls Chad Daybell. This lasts a minute and 46 seconds. At 2:07, Detective Inclan calls Lori and leaves a message. At 2:13, Alex takes photos of Charles Vallow's cell phone. Trina K says this is why Lori didn't call him back or call Detective Inclan back right away, is because they were busy taking pictures of the phone and calling Chad Daybell. At 2:18, Lori finally calls the Valley of the Sun mortuary, just hours after Charles is shot. That is just damning to me. Then at 2:28, Chad calls Lori for 11 minutes and 13 seconds. And then finally, at 3:11, Lori, Alex, and Tylee return to the Four Peaks house to give Detective Inclan Charles Vallow's phone. And they provide his PIN at that time. I'm really glad she showed this timeline. And I know she showed timelines throughout the entire closing argument. I'm just going to check my settings real quick because I think I have the wrong. I do. I've got the wrong thing going on. Hey, give me 1 second. I just want to see if I can improve the audio quality here real quick. And if I'm going to share video, it won't work unless I change this setting. So thanks for being patient with me while I figure this out. Okay. I don't know if that's for you or not. I'm hoping that it did, because I'm hoping that makes the audio quality any better. Calling the mortuary is stunning information because it's just hours after Charles was shot and killed. It's not like they waited any time. His body was still laying on the floor in the house. He hadn't even been taken away by the medical examiner yet. And to me, that's stunning, because usually what happens is the death happens and you take care of all the business with the police and the medical examiner. And then once the medical examiner has completed the autopsy, then maybe is a good time to call the mortuary and figure out what you're going to do next. I would think, I don't know. Fortunately, I'm so fortunate that I haven't had to be in that position. So maybe other people would have done it differently. And then, yes, Chad called the funeral home that day as well. Same funeral home, by the way. I think just called later than Lori did. And I don't know why we don't have a recording of Lori calling the mortuary. But yes, they didn't call any family. You call family first. You notify the family first. Like, that's the first thing that you do. The first thing that you do is you take care of your loved ones, right? And then you start making arrangements. So anyway, that's why that was stunning to me. Then Trina K moved on to the motives, and she talked about how it was money and how she used this religious belief system and being like Nephi. Then Trina K played the recording of Lori calling the Banner Life Insurance Company just a few days after the death of Charles. And what was stunning to me about that call is when the insurance agent or the person on the phone asks Lori, how did he die? There's a super long pause, long seconds of pauses. And then she says, well, he was shot. It takes her a long time to come up with this response. And then they didn't play this part, but the agent asks her if it was an accident or not. And she kind of fumbles around her words. I will talk about Lori's closing argument after I talk about Trina K's, and we will talk about how she thinks that her statements got twisted. It doesn't concern me that the jury didn't deliberate very long tonight, just because they had an earful today. This was a lot to go through. And yeah, I agree with you that for a minute I thought she was going to do the money, sex, and power thing, but she kind of did. She did mention the money first, and she did mention the religious belief system, and then she mentioned being with Chad Daybell. And then I'm going to go back to this video because the next thing that we are shown that the jury sees is a summary of text messages that went back and forth. And I want to see what was highlighted in that. So I'll go back and share this as well. She notes that the affair with Chad Daybell is a big part of the motive here. And the text messages, it's kind of hard to read them because we're looking at a camera shot of an overhead projector. So I was trying to see if I could see which ones they referenced, but it was the text exchange between Lori Vallow and the Chad Daybell number that was called Bubby. And if you remember in one of my recaps, I referenced that Lori and Summer often referred to their brothers as Bubby. And this was just another bit of subterfuge to try so that if anybody saw her texting somebody named Bubby, they wouldn't think anything of it. Whereas if she put his actual name, they would say, who is this Chad Daybell person? Then Trina K referenced that Lori knew a month before she went to her appointment in the Social Security office that she knew how much money she was going to be getting because of that text. And I think this is what was on the video. Because of the text where she said, we still get the $4,000 from Social Security. That was before she went to the Social Security office to make an application. She already knew how much she was going to get. Sorry, I'm getting some good vibes from friends over here. And a reminder that I'm going to be on Hidden True Crime tonight at 10 p.m. Central Time, 11 Eastern Time. And I made that appointment a couple weeks ago and then thought it was last week. So if I get a chance to interview jurors, I would absolutely love to. As some of you know, Tom Evans was a juror on Lori's first trial. He and I have become good friends along with his wife, Susan. And I would love to talk to some more of these jurors and at the very least, thank them for their service and for what they have gone through and will go through after they learn what happened. And I'm sure that there will be definitely some fallout for them mental health wise. It had to have been really, really traumatic. So then Trina K says that Lori was so angry about this change that she sends a copy of the beneficiary change form to Chad Daybell and then to Kay Woodcock with some threatening texts accompanying. Then the next thing that Trina K shows on the screen, or that we see, the next thing that we see for the jurors is a sort of a timeline of Lori's affair with Chad Daybell. And I'm going to see if I can find it here really quickly to show it to you. The next thing that I see here is about the religious beliefs, but I'm going to go through real quick and see if they show it. They had some technical difficulties at one point here. Okay, so the next thing that they show to the jury here is Adam's testimony. But what I'm going to do, so yeah, I am going to be on Web Sleuths tonight. I usually do I have a playlist on my channel called, I think it's called Daybell Case Interviews with other people's interviews, and they're all there. So I am going on tonight, and you can always watch those on the replay, but I will post the link on my channel so that you can go and watch it whenever you're ready to. So I want to share this screen real quick because Trina K brings in, let me see if I can change the layout here so that you can see a little better. There we go. Trina K brings in some of Adam's testimony, talking about Lori's twisted religious beliefs. But I want to go back just for 1 second, because while Trina K was talking about Chad Daybell and the timeline for their affair, she mentioned, Lori hasn't worked in 13 years. Her husband paid for phones, homes, travel, so she could go to the temple and go out to lunch with her friends. And if that goes away, it signifies a big change in her lifestyle. Did I say Hidden True Crime? I meant to say Web Sleuths. Definitely it's Web Sleuths tonight, not Hidden True Crime. And so this big change in her lifestyle necessitated some financial benefit, and that's why she was looking so forward to that life insurance policy coming through. Then she goes to Adam and his testimony about the translation of Lori, and she plays some of that for the jury again. Lori told Adam she was turning into a celestial being. Lori told Adam she didn't need to eat. Lori told Adam that she had more priesthood authority than the priesthood in the church. She was above this. And I just want to say, somebody was asking in the chat, and it was much too long for me to respond, why is it that Lori brought in the religious aspect of it, and why did she use religion to justify what she wanted to do with Chad Daybell? And I will just say, I think that partly the reason she brought religion into it is because that was a way of pulling her family in and keeping them close. If she had just come to her family and said, you know what, Charles is having an affair, and Charles is being rude to me, he's being mean to me, he's fighting with Tylee, and I want to divorce him, you know, there might have been some division there. Janice might have said to her, you need to stand by your man. You made this commitment. You've been divorced already. You know, you and Charles were in the temple together. You need to stay with him. There might have been some blowback. But the second that she says, God told me, can't argue with that. God told me to do this. Well, I can't argue with somebody else's personal witness. If I pray to God and I get an answer that I'm supposed to sell my house, people can't really come back and say, what are you thinking? You know, the market's terrible right now. You're not going to be able to get as much money out of it. They would just say, this is how this is in the Mormon religion. When you get a revelation that you're supposed to do something, make a big decision, do whatever it is. If you say, I've prayed about it, I've fasted, I've been to the temple, I really feel that God is telling me to go in this direction, then people's response is more likely to be, okay, God will help you figure it out. But if Lori went to her family and said, Charles needs to die, probably there's going to be some pushback there. Although, seeing the way that they talked about Joe Ryan and the way that Lori said that the world was a better place without Joe Ryan, you know, it wouldn't surprise me if they were like, yeah, he'd be a good, you know, the world would be a better place without that abuser on the earth. So anyway, it's just my theory that, you know, when a Mormon comes and says, I've prayed about this, God has told me, God has revealed this to me, it sort of keeps her family pulled into supporting her rather than pushing back on her. They're much less likely to push back on her. Then the next thing that Trina K brings into her closing is Serena Sharp's testimony about the beliefs that Lori is talking about not being mainstream LDS. Her not needing to repent, for example, her being a translated being, and saying that she knew everybody in this women's group from prior lives. And Trina points out, Serena Sharp has no dog in this fight. She's not a victim in this case. She doesn't have a reason to tell these stories if they're not true. And so just lending credibility to Serena Sharp, she came here willingly to testify against Lori, not because she has any kind of vindictive nature or because she wants to lie, just that she believes this is right. Then Trina K does a really good job about describing the difference between direct and circumstantial evidence. And she gives this analogy of being on an island. And I don't honestly remember, and maybe Irish Jen, you can lend some credibility or some, I don't know, context to this. This is one of the points where I checked out. I had to do some deep breathing because I was just thinking about all these family dynamics, and it was starting to get me stressed. So I checked out for the island analogy, but it was something to the effect of, if you're on an island and you see something happens, I don't know exactly what the analogy was, but I can give you an analogy here. Okay. So if you're on an island and lightning strikes a tree and the tree burns down, you can bring a picture of the tree beforehand. You can bring a picture of the tree afterwards, and you can bring evidence of the charred remains of the tree. And that's direct evidence. Indirect evidence would be, I was sitting there and I saw lightning strike the tree and I saw it burning, right? And so that's a good, yes, thank you, Piano Mom. If someone walks by, you witness it. If you see the footprints, they were there. So that difference between direct evidence and circumstantial evidence. And I thought that was great for Trina to clear that up for everybody. More of a Leslie, always good to see you here on the channel. This was a tragedy, but the fatal flaw was not seeing the danger through their love of Lori and their inherent goodness. Lori is the tragedy. Yeah, I think the fatal flaw was not holding Lori accountable earlier on for some of her manipulative behaviors. That's what I would have liked to see. So thank you for that super sticker, Amor Valesi. I appreciate it. And yes, I think Lori's turning to the darkest parts of her personality and not healing her own emotional wounds, turning into the type of person who needs to manipulate and control rather than relating in healthy ways, her inability to be introspective about her own behavior, her inability to care about how her behaviors and beliefs affected other people, that is the tragedy that caused all of these tragedies. I'm starring just a couple of comments, and I have a gnat here because the dangers of traveling. I bought some mangoes before I left for Arizona last time, and when I came back, they were not ripe anymore. They were rotten, and now I have some fruit flies flying around my house. Yes, I've tried the vinegar in a glass trick, and I have a little bug zapper in there taking care of them, but I've got a couple still left over. So sorry for the sidetrack there. So then Trina K goes on and she says, the state has the burden of proof. You have to be firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt. The evidence does not have to overcome every doubt. It has to overcome a reasonable doubt. In other words, a reasonable person could say, this is plausible, and it has overcome that level of doubt. The state must prove that the defendant caused the death, or that the co-conspirators caused the death. And we know that Alex Cox shot Charles Vallow. We know that he called 911, and we know that he told police that he was a shooter. So check, we proved that one. The state must prove that the words and actions of the defendants led to the crime being committed. In other words, Lori inviting Alex Cox to her house with a gun when Charles Vallow was going to be there at the same time, and then taking his phone, refusing to give it back. Lori Vallow is the only reason Charles Vallow stayed and was shot. And for 12 minutes, Lori said this was a quick thing. She says that it wasn't a big deal. It was a quick fight, but it was 12 minutes between the time he entered the house and the time his phone left the property. That was long enough to think things through. It was long enough to set this series of events into motion. Then Trina K reiterates, when Lori Vallow comes back to the scene, she never asks if Alex is okay. He's been hit in the head with a bat. She never asks about his well-being. She never asks about Charles's well-being. What happened? She says, I was there, or I heard the shot and then I left. When she comes back, she doesn't even want to know, did he survive? Then Trina talks about the money and Chad Daybell. That this crime happened the first time Charles Vallow came back to Arizona. Then she talks about the definition of premeditation. It has to include planning, not that it just happened that morning. And she notes again, they were planning this since back in June at the latest. And then we have the testimony of Serena Sharp saying that when Alex said he just wanted to kill Charles, that he was jocular. I thought the choice of that word was really interesting. I've only heard it a couple of times from older people who have a more, an older vocabulary that's used, in times before I was really aware of such words. The jocularity of someone just being casual and joking and thinking it was sort of funny. This is where Alex always was, just kind of joking about everything. And so one who had been around Alex a lot might think that Alex was making a joke. But for someone who had previously committed violence against one of Lori's romantic partners, for someone like that to joke about killing Charles, that he just wanted to kill Charles, was pretty problematic. And I'm sure it would be received as, sometimes you can tell when someone's telling a joke, especially if you know them really well. But if someone is joking about, man, I just wish I could kill Charles, that to me, that's weird. That's not something that I would be okay with somebody joking about. Then she reiterated, Charles Vallow is her cash car. Her car, her cell phone, her rent, her vacations, her travel were all paid for by Charles Vallow. She needed something to replace that income. And then she refers to Lori's team. She talks about Janice and Summer and Melanie and how they all rallied around Lori and how they helped her to isolate Charles and how they informed her of what Adam and Zach were doing that day. Then Lori's comments that she was above the priesthood, that she and Chad could tell who was light and dark, and that she and Chad could tell who needed to die. Then she noted, Alex didn't bring anything to try and stop this intervention. He didn't bring a Book of Mormon. He brought a gun. And then again, she notes, 12 minutes went by. In addition, there were 2 shots, not just one, and the second one was Charles Vallow laying on the floor, on his back, bleeding out, able to move because he put his hand to his chest wound, and that he was executed. She used that word twice. Then she talks about premeditation and reflection. Alex had enough time to reflect about his actions. He had enough time to leave the altercation, to go to his room and get the gun and bring it back. Alex said, and this is me, this is not Trina K saying this, but when Alex was sitting on the curb He says to the officer that he went to his room, he got the gun, he came back out, and he said, "What are you doing?" To me, that pause tells me Charles isn't coming at him with a bat. There's no immediate threat right in front of him. Alex had time to make a comment to Charles before he shot Charles. To me, that shows there was time enough for him to reflect. Trina says he had to move and reposition the gun, and that is premeditated first-degree murder. She referenced the medical examiner's report. There was no t-shirt that could have shored up this wound. The medical examiner said Charles Vallow did not bounce, but there were abrasions on his knees, suggesting that he fell to his knees and that his body would have had to been moved or repositioned at some point. But that second shot clearly showed that he was laying on his back when he was shot for the second time. So she asked the jury to consider the words, the actions, the motives, and the physical evidence that point to the fact that this was premeditated murder. Then she talked a little bit about the conspiracy. You have to find that the defendant agreed that they would engage in certain conduct with the other person. Sorry, just something caught my eye that I wanted to star. She said there was no damage to the mirror. The bat was placed on Charles's right side. You heard the testimony, and she played it, of Kay saying that Charles was left-handed. There was not one drop of blood on the floor, not in the hallway, not in the main room, not on the gun itself, as Alex returned the gun to his room. Then she makes a reference to the shoes that were left by the front door. And when I saw the crime scene photos, I thought that those were Charles Vallow's flip-flops that were left by the front door. But it seems like Trina Kay is mentioning that Lori said that she left the shoes, or that there were Lori's shoes left by the front door, saying that she ran out of the house without shoes. But then in the Walgreens video, she clearly does have shoes on. And there were some people in the chat that basically said, hey, we did this. We were the super sleuths who pointed out that she was wearing shoes in that Walgreens video. And I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if Trina Kay knew that before people came out all over the internet saying that Lori was wearing shoes in that Walgreens video or not. But Trina Kay pointed it out in her closing. She did have shoes on. Then she said, let's talk about the credibility of this defendant. She says there's no motive for these witnesses to lie about their exposure, their involvement in this case. But let's talk about Lori's credibility. Let's talk about her demeanor. How she says in her police interview, and they replayed some of it. Why don't you tell me who you've been texting on the phone, blah, 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 whatever. What does that mean, Lori? What does blah, 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 whatever mean? It means that you just made that up and you didn't actually ever say that. Trina Kay points out, Lori says, no money for the 5 kids. She didn't have 5 kids. She had 2 kids living at home with her at this time. She points out to the investigator, Detective Inclan, who is interviewing her, that she was gone for 30 days to show Charles Vallow, now you can see what it's like to take care of JJ for all that time. When in actuality, she was gone for 58 days. So Lori lied about the amount of time that she was actually gone. Then let's talk about her calls to Banner Life Insurance, where she sort of engages into some subterfuge about the cause of death, where she asks, during that time that she was gone, she is in Hawaii. She's taking trips with Chad Daybell. She abandons JJ. Then she asks about whether it's hot in July, whether they do need shoes or not to take JJ to school. When we see in the Walgreens video, she brings that up again. She was wearing shoes in that video. She did not need to stop for those shoes. Then she talks about justification. She says verbal provocation alone does not justify self-defense. And she said the provocation in this case did not justify self-defense. And she says if it's self-defense, you have to be engaging in crime prevention. It does not permit execution. And that was where that second shot comes into play. And that was it. An hour and 45 minutes. It was a lot. It was definitely a lot to take in. But Trina Kate made some excellent points. She reiterated some excellent points several times. I think if I'm on the jury listening to that recap and I've got the PowerPoint presentation in front of me, she went through the entire timeline of the case and all of the evidence that was presented that proves the state's case. I think they really did make their burden personally in this. So then Lori gets up for her closing. And let's just say she was nowhere near as long as Trina K, thank goodness. She was nowhere near as eloquent, and she didn't have any evidence to point to. However, I do also have to say, this is the first time that I've heard Lori bring up some real salient points, some arguments that kind of make sense, some arguments that might, in other circumstances, create some doubt with the jury. Now, if it were me, which it never would be, first of all, for so many reasons, but if I were an attorney, perhaps representing a case, a defendant like this, I would have presented evidence. I would have presented some rebuttal witnesses. I would have called some things into question. Because the points that Lori makes are fine and everything, but without any evidence at all and without any testimony from the defendant at all, this is, again, just Lori making conjecture, just trying to draw conclusions. And I will also tell you, you will not be disappointed. There were several objections. Several of her things got stricken from the record as well. Hey, Kresha, great to see you here. I'm glad you're here. I caught the very end of your live, but yes, it was morning time in July, not scorching hot yet that early. I can attest in Phoenix, it was lovely in the morning for the most part. Let's not forget how the Cox family rallied around Alex, calling him an effing hero. Yes, please, let's never forget that. I have some thoughts about that. I have a lot of thoughts about that. Yeah, Colby was there in court with his wife today. I hope he's holding up okay. He's going to be going live at 7:30. Irish Jen, is that correct? I don't know if it's 7 or 7:30. So maybe Irish Jen, you can grab the link to his video and we'll put it on here because I would love to have everyone support him as well. His voice matters more than mine does, more than anyone else does. I think at this particular moment. So here, let's launch into Lori's closing, okay? The state has the 100% burden of proving the merits of this case. And if the state fails to carry that burden, you must find me not guilty. And then she talks about the justification of self-defense. You have to be firmly convinced. And then she says that self-defense is not a crime. True. Thanks, Irish Jen. Not confirmed, but potentially Colby live at 7:30 Mountain Time. So that's 8:30 Central if he does do a live tonight. And some people have said, yeah, Sherry is saying he'll do a live once the verdict is in. And yes, I know my voice matters, but I want to listen to Colby because this is his immediate family and his direct experience. And all I'm doing is I'm on the periphery making comments to help people understand. That's all. I don't think the jury knows that Tammy also died. I think that would be opening the door to Idaho, and so I don't think so. And thanks for putting that link up there for Colby's channel. Please go and like his channel, subscribe to his channel, and listen to Colby. That's really important. He does a great interview with Lieutenant Hermosillo. He's done several great interviews with Hidden True Crime, talking with Dr. John about all of this. So I appreciate that. Okay, going on with Lori here. She says, you heard there was a shooting. You heard that 911 was called. You heard that fire, EMS, and police showed up on the scene. You heard that Alex came out and was compliant with everything. And then she's so petty. You also heard that we asked for Tylee's medications, and those medications were not given to us. Poor Lori. Again, not poor Tylee, but she's calling attention to how that was hurtful to her. You heard, she says, you heard that Alex Cox was taken to the police station uncuffed in a police car. You heard that it was Detective Inclan's goal to make small talk on the way, and that was objected to. And then I have a note here to speak separately. Oh, her objective was to speak separately with the defendants, but there was an objection to Detective Inclan's goal to make small talk, because that's Lori testifying. It's her assuming what Detective Inclan was, what her motives were in that case. And then she said, Lori said, you heard that the three of us were separated, that we answered all the questions, and you saw snippets of my interview. She said, Exhibit 286, and she showed the little exhibit with the sticky note on it. And she said, this contains my full interview, and I encourage you to watch the entire thing and to determine my demeanor for yourself. She said, you heard that this happened 6 years ago. Again, a bit of an exaggeration. And that the memories of the detectives were much better back then than they are now. Okay, I thought I was going to sneeze, and I didn't want to sneeze into the microphone, but then it went away. Then she says, you're going to hear that Tylee Ryan and Alex Cox's interviews were not seen. You're going to hear, we didn't even hear from Detective Moffat. And then Trina Kay objects, and she moves to strike. And she actually objected right after Lori mentioned Tylee Ryan and Alex Cox's interviews, but Lori talks over her and says that she objects and moves to strike, and it was sustained. The jury was ordered to disregard the comment about Tylee Ryan and Alex Cox's interviews not being seen. Good point here, Kresha, about being prescribed medication for anxiety. Antidepressants, yes, it could be that Tylee was prescribed some type of Xanax or other type of thing for anxiety disorder. That's what I was prescribed when I was suffering from anxiety. I don't know what other medication she might have been on, but it's a stressful situation. She probably did need her medication. But as Detective Inclan pointed out, the whole home was a crime scene at this point, and nobody was allowed to go in until they were finished processing the scene. So Detective Inclan said, yes, we will ask if we can get the medication. But again, then we can't guarantee that that is going to happen. So if I'm assuming if Tylee had a severe reaction and she was having a panic attack, they could have taken her to the emergency room to get the medication that she needed, which definitely would have been difficult. But the jury did not know that the kids have passed away. It wasn't explicitly said, because that would have been opening the door. But Kay got in that the last time she saw JJ was May 18th, and they have to be wondering where these kids are and why Tylee isn't testifying, because she certainly would have been old enough to at this point. So we got an objection and a move to strike sustained for the state. And then Lori says, you will note that Alex Cox's phone was taken, but the police did not make a digital copy of that phone. And there were no further inquiries of Alex at this time. Then you'll note that myself and Tylee were introduced to a victim's advocate. We followed all the directions. Then there was a walkthrough back at the house, and she names all the detectives who were present. And she said somehow that body cam footage was not recorded, and there was no report written. There was crucial evidence missing. And then there was an objection to hearsay, a move to strike, and that was sustained. And then it happened a second time as Lori began to go again. Is Xanax a narcotic? I don't think it's a narcotic. It is considered a controlled substance, but I don't think it's a narcotic, because that's different. Is it? It is a narcotic. Jen is telling me it is. Okay, well, I didn't know. This whole time I've been taking narcotics and didn't know it. I mean, back when I had anxiety. And I have seen Xanax prescribed to kids in extreme situations, but also we know JJ was taking medication for his autism. It is a benzo, so I guess that does make it a narcotic. You're right. My brain was not in that place at the moment. So anyway, it's a controlled substance, and it is sometimes prescribed to adolescents. Yeah, Irish Jen says it's not a narcotic. It is a benzodiazepine. They could have prescribed hydroxyzine, really strong Benadryl. All true. Klonopin for anxiety. I don't know. You guys know more than I do. Same Valium. So yeah, same family as Valium, not a narcotic. Yeah. Okay, moving on. We could talk about that all day probably. So this is actually the point right before the objection that I really thought Lori was making some good points. They didn't test anybody for gunshot residue. She's going to bring that up in a second. So I'll go through some more of this, and then I'll say why some of these are a good point, right? She said, you will hear that the police treated this like it was a self-defense. No further instructions were given to us. And then she said, then you know that there was a press release that was put out, and Trina K objected to that. That objection was sustained. She can't mention that press release because it wasn't entered into evidence. Again, Lori, if you wanted to call any witnesses, like for example, the PR person from the Chandler Police Department who issued the press statement, the press release, that would have been a smart thing to do, to call that person to the stand and say, why did you issue this press release? Let's read it. Let's see. Goodness gracious, Lori. Then she said, this event was not planned or expected. It was shocking. She says there was not a thorough investigation. There were no swabs for gunshot residue of Alex, of me, of Tylee. They did not luminol the gun, the bat. They didn't test the DNA on the bat. They didn't test the shirt. They didn't test the cars, or they didn't go through the cars. They didn't test the gun until 5 years later. And she has a good point on all of that evidence, except for the luminol. She doesn't know how luminol works. But then she said this case was self-defense and it was a tragic family event. Everybody knew that we were having marriage problems, but this was self-defense. Then she does a big sigh and she says, Charles Vallow didn't have to take the bat from Tylee. He could have put it down. This fight did last 2 minutes. And then she started to say, you can't choose between the people that you love, and then objection to her testifying. And the judge cautioned her not to testify. She said, when you feel threatened, you can't. And then there was an objection to that. And Trina K objected to it, but the judge said that she could address that in her rebuttal. Lori says she was shocked about the life insurance being changed, but she was not angry. She said, you know, you heard in that call to the life insurance agency that I was not angry. She said, I was disappointed for our 5 kids. And then she said that the concept of Nephi. Let me just take a quick drink of water, guys. Sorry. She said the state's evidence about my text referencing Nephi is utterly ridiculous. You heard the Detective Duncan say he had no idea what that text about Nephi meant. And then she started to say, in my religion, in the Mormon religion, Nephi signifies courage and strength. And as she was getting that out, Trina K objected to her testifying, which was sustained. Lori said, the state misconstrued the positive messaging about a beloved prophet or something to that effect. Somebody asked a question about that, and maybe this is a good time for me to address it. This was Joel Roberts said, anyone can access the Book of Mormon scripture online. Any questions to where Lori felt justified? Read Nephi 3:7, and that's why she felt murder was justified. We kind of went over that, and I did a whole video called Be Like Nephi that talks about that and the true Mormon belief, because I was a Mormon for the first 45 years of my life, raised in the religion. I was very faithful and devout. I too had a temple recommend, went to the temple regularly, although certainly not every day. Excuse me, but I never did raise to the level of seeing Jesus in the temple or being a translated being or having a higher priesthood. So I didn't quite get to that point. I was looking. Okay, so I do see some questions in here, but I don't see a specific Nephi question. But someone at some point asked about what were the other Nephi stories. Well, so there are 4 books in the Book of Mormon that mention Nephi. The first 2 are about the Nephi. We've all talked about the Nephi from this text. The second 2 books are from a later Nephi who was a descendant of that first Nephi. And there are plenty of stories in the Book of Mormon where Nephi is courageous. He's trying to follow God's orders. He's trying to follow God's plan for him. They were trying to get to the promised land. And God commanded Nephi to build a boat and to go over the ocean, and directed him how to do that. So there were plenty of stories about Nephi being courageous and following God. But as Detective Duncan pointed out, he asked open-ended questions of people who are faithful LDS members. And he said, without fail, they all answered the same with this story about Nephi killing Laban, not about any of the other stories, because this is the story. It's the main story. This is the first story in the Book of Mormon. So my cat's name is Karen, who wrote the Nephi story. Well, it's my opinion that Joseph Smith wrote the entire Book of Mormon. It's my opinion that he made it up. It's my opinion that it's Bible fan fiction. People will say, faithful people will say that it was written on gold plates, so that they'll say that Nephi wrote the Nephi story. So, Kresha has a lot of information. She's done a lot of research. She says, I will be like Nephi, I'm told, and so will you. Every person and place I've researched Nephi has been the same conclusion as what the prosecutor implied. When it talks about being like Nephi, it talks about being courageous to do something even when you think it might be wrong. That's the Nephi story. That's the one that everybody talks about. So, Church of the Lastborn. I love it. That's great. Perfect. Just summarize it this way. I don't care what religion you are. You cannot unalive people. That is wrong, no matter what the circumstances are, unless it really is, self-defense. But we've heard a lot about self-defense and what meets the burden for that. And Trina Cage addresses it very specifically in her rebuttal. So we are going to get back to it. All right. So Lori says that the state is trying to retrofit a crime that doesn't exist. Don't let them turn my family tragedy into a crime, she says, fake tearfully. She says, remember, it's the state's job to prove that I conspired to commit a crime. You have to be firmly convinced that I committed this very crime. She said, the only interview that was entered into evidence was mine, and I told you exactly what happened. Jen, thank you so much for the super sticker. I appreciate you. Lori says that the state has tried to attack her character, and they've tried to say that I'm guilty no matter what. She said, only you get to decide. She said, there has been 0 people who know of a conspiracy. There was no agreement. This tragedy was the result of the sad effects of a family torn apart. Fake tearfully. These bad Mormons use religion as a vehicle to deceive and harm others, as Diddy uses hip hop to allegedly do the things that he did. And I have to say that I agree. Crush, I'm so glad you're here, and I always appreciate your contributions. And sometimes I like you to be here because sometimes I have a theory about something and I'm not sure if I'm forgetting something. So I want to talk about my theory about what actually happened, and see if I have any if I've left any holes in that. So that is pretty much where Lori left her statement, basically with those last words of there was no agreement. This was the sad effects of a family torn apart. And I agree. The family has been torn apart because of everything that Lori did. Kresha. Thank you for making me laugh. I appreciate you so much. Okay, now we have Trina K's brilliant rebuttal. And I actually thought her brilliant rebuttal was even better than her closing statement, if that's possible. It was obviously much shorter, thank goodness, because I was full by the time she was done with this. But she gets up and the first thing that she says, an execution is not a family tragedy. Someone asked earlier, what is a shored wound? A shored wound occurs when a bullet strikes a hard object behind a person. And so that's what has proven, in the state's opinion, that Charles Vallow was laying on his back when he was shot the second time, because the bullet struck the hard floor and it created a wound sort of being packed together like this. There would be less blood there, and there would be definitely different exit wound, as we saw as well. And so the medical examiner was asked if this was typical of a shored wound, and he said it was textbook. And thank you for adding, my cat's name is Karen, a hard surface behind the soft tissue of a body. Thank you. My thought train cut off before I finished that. So in other words, Trina K's assertion is that this was an execution because of the second shot being a shored wound. Then she says, this case is not about Alex Cox. Alex Cox was her co-conspirator. And then she said, don't forget her words, Lori's words in the text, saying, we got rid of him before we got rid of him. Kelly D, thanks for the super sticker. I do feel your appreciation. Thank you so much. Because I know there are many who don't want to listen to the whole thing. And I know there are many who don't want to listen to Lori's triggering baby voice. And so that's the reason I do these things. I hope that people are getting some value out of it. And if you do value it, please like it. And please bring your friends when you come back next time. I'm going to continue talking about healthier relationships, healthy family systems, at the intersection of narcissism, true crime, high demand religion. I'm going to be here for all of that. And I've got some cases that I'm already looking into that I'm just going to hit the ground running as soon as this thing is over with. So watch out. Kresha and I are coming for the conspiracies everywhere. Trina says, she references the fair again. And then she says that Lori had been planning this for months. People were telling her that it was wrong. People knew that she was planning something. And Alex Cox came to her house with a loaded gun and he waited, and Charles Vallow was held in that house by this defendant by using his cell phone to keep him there. And Trina says, go ahead, watch the video. That's why I prepared it for you, the whole entire interview. She doesn't cry. She isn't truthful. She gets the timeline wrong. For 12 minutes, Charles Vallow was in the house. The police understood that it was just a short time, that it had just happened. The police understood, but all they knew was that the timeline was off, and they had questions about that second bullet. And so, yeah, there were things that were missed. Maybe they didn't investigate right away, but they all knew that the timeline was off. Thank you so much, Kresha, for the super sticker. It disappeared before I had a chance to put it up on the screen, but I do appreciate it. And thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for labeling it super sticker, because I never know what they are. And thank you, Karen Wilkinson, for the super sticker. Love that. Thank you so much for your support, guys. I appreciate it. And Desert Rain, I can answer this question. It's a longer question than I want to get into right now. I have done a deep dive into, of course, my own family history. On my dad's side, my dad's mom, Janice's mom, was the first member of the church in that part of the family. And so they joined back in the 60s. But Barry's family joined the church a little earlier than that. And I do have a deep dive video coming on Barry Cox and his family of origin. It'll be pretty interesting to learn. I think Barry has always been a grifter. I think his dad was a grifter. And it'll be really interesting, I think, for people to know what goes on with that. So, anyone in the Cox family have any college education? Seems to be lacking. Well, I know that Janice attended BYU for a time. I don't know that she ever graduated. She may have. I remember a rumor, family story, that Janice had a master's degree, but I don't know. I haven't had seen any evidence of that. I also know that Barry attended BYU, and he has said that he graduated with a Bachelor of Science. But again, I don't have any evidence of his graduation. I have him in the BYU yearbook as a senior, but I have never seen his diploma. I've never seen a graduation announcement. I'm still looking. He then attended 1 year of college for law school. But again, that I'm going to leave all of that for the Barry Cox deep dive, because I don't have all my notes in front of me for that right now. What Barry Cox did for a living, he sold life insurance, and later in his career, he was involved with financial planning, although he wasn't a certified financial planner. And he did recently, like 2018, I believe, receive a cease and desist from the state of Arizona for putting himself out as an estate planner, which you have to be an attorney to do that. And he is not an attorney. Barry and Janice are still together. And I really think this is hilarious. Barry got his BS, but that was genetic. Thanks for helping me laugh. I appreciate it. I will have all the Barry Cox answers on a separate, because that is a rabbit hole for a separate video. So let's go on with this rebuttal. Trina K says, go ahead and watch that video, even if you believe that there was a bat. In Arizona, self-defense does not allow for an execution on the ground. Lori says she was shocked, but then she went around town. She went to the Burger King. She went to the Walgreens. She bought flip-flops. And then she comes back to the scene and jokes about her neighbors. Tylee Ryan wasn't shocked. Alex Cox wasn't shocked. And the reason why is because they took 47 minutes after the shooting to plan. and to talk about how they were going to handle all of this. Then Trina K says she was having an affair with Chad Daybell. It was well documented, but then she wanted to refer to Charles Vallow as my husband. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate it so much, Trina K. And then she says, yes, Lori was angry. She wasn't just disappointed. She was angry about the life insurance. In her text, she said, after we got rid of him, the we she was talking about was herself and Alex Cox. That was her confession. That's why she's guilty. And that's where Trina K left it. I thought that was an amazing rebuttal. It was a wonderful way to close. And then what happened is that they went ahead and removed jurors 14 and 5. Neither of them were women. And so those other jurors will deliberate, but the 2 jurors can possibly be called back. If I recall correctly, juror 5 was a younger person. I did hear his exclamation as he was removed from the jury. He was clearly disappointed that he was not going to get to deliberate. Kresha says, if Tylee's interview would have been admitted, just know the jury would still have the same questions as before the interview, 47 minutes before calling 911. And also, where is Tylee? That's the other thing that they would have questioned. And then Lori wanted the jury to watch the entire video of her video with Detective Inclan, because that's her way of testifying without taking the witness stand. Exactly. So she doesn't have to be cross-examined, but she gets to get in the story that she told Detective Inclan that morning. But as we see, I love that Trina K pointed this out. Go ahead and watch the video. Fine. What you're going to see in that video is that she was not upset. She was not shocked. That there was nothing in there that she was not truthful. She got the timeline wrong. And that was what the police knew, is that when Lori and Tylee left with a victim's advocate, when Alex was not arrested, they didn't treat it as self-defense because they knew the timeline did not add up. Mad Router, thanks for the super chat. No offense at all, but state didn't fully prove conspiracy, in my opinion. Will you be mad if they come back not guilty? Well, of course I'm going to be mad if they come back not guilty. I fight with myself about this because obviously the rest of us, we all know about this case. We know that there's way more evidence out there, and a lot of it is circumstantial, and a lot of it is hard to say. There is no point. And this was a good point for Lori to make this, where she said, did you see, hear, or personally witness me conspire with my brother to kill my husband? And nobody could say yes to that question. So we don't have, any sort of what you would call smoking gun damning evidence. However, when I was sitting there in the courtroom and they showed the text of Chad Daybell, who we know Lori was having an affair with. I don't think there's any question about that. Lori didn't even question. She didn't even call that into question at all. The text said, it'll be interesting to know if he changed the policy after he had 2 bullets in his chest. That was damning. And the text that said, when we got rid of him, that was damning. So to me, all of that, with them talking about Charles being a zombie for months and months and months and months, and then coming back and having people say, it's wrong for you to say that. I'm going to go to the police if anything happens to him. And then again, the first time that I heard about this from a family member, there was a memorial posted for Charles on Facebook by one of my family members. I immediately texted her and I said, I'm so sorry. What happened? I knew Charles to be in good health. And they immediately texted me and said, Alex was at Lori's house the night before. He brought his gun with him. He didn't need to be there. There was no reason for him to be staying there. They knew Charles was coming to pick up JJ. They killed him. They murdered him. That was this family member's take. And absolutely, after hearing all of that, I believed the same. I knew Lori's pattern of discarding people. And I can imagine, and now I know for sure, Lori telling her family in advance, that Charles was having an affair and that he was arguing with Tylee. And then later, Janice calling Alex a hero for what he did. In my mind, there's absolutely no doubt that it was pre-planned, it was premeditated, it was a conspiracy to commit murder between the two of them. No doubt in my mind, just hearing only that and not even testimony from all the other people anyway. I want to go back to what you said, Kresha. Thanks for showing that comment. Nobody ever agrees like that, in my opinion. Thank you. But you can see how each conspirator furthered the conspiracy along, and I completely agree with that. And then hearing the texts going back and forth between Melanie and Summer and Janice's comment, they were trying to prevent Adam from doing this intervention, and they were helping Lori to isolate Charles. They were helping for this situation to occur, and in my opinion, they are accessories. Even if they're accessories after the fact, not calling police, not reporting what they knew, I really hope that there is enough proof to charge them. Kresha says, in a video I obtained of Adam and Alex, Lamar is his middle name. I have to go back because I didn't get to finish reading it. Thank you, Jen. I appreciate you showing comments. Adam refers to Lamar as a gun expert. I'm just saying. Yeah, I mean, Alex was somewhat of a gun expert. He went shooting all the time. He would have probably been, a decent shot at close range, although we know that he messed stuff up later on. He was pretty incompetent. And he was pretty dumb about his location and the things that he logged into his burner phone. I'm glad that they did that because it means that we have all this evidence. But yes, I agree with you, Kresha. The texts seal the deal. The family were absolutely the flying monkeys, like most narcissistic family members. They were all rallying around the golden child, who was Lori. And yeah, Stephanie, I don't blame you for yelling. When people conspire, they don't do it in front of a live audience. I would never get on this video and say, hey guys, I just would like to have your help with a situation that I'm trying to work out in my life. Let's go slash some tires or something. I would never do that. Obviously, people don't do it. I agree with you. I think there is enough evidence to present for some of these other people to be charged with conspiracy. I'm wondering if more charges are coming too. I hope so, because I think all of these people participated in this event that then eventually led to the deaths of more people. And I want them to be held accountable. So yes, and I love this username, Church of the Lastborn. How did Alex have a legal permit? Wasn't he a violent offender? Yes, he was, but he did his time. And part of his plea deal, he did plead guilty to assaulting Joe Ryan. Part of that deal was that he would eventually get his gun rights restored to him. And so that's why he was able to legally possess firearms. However, I think that the police dropped the ball when they did not look farther into that assault and the fact that he did time for that. The Cox crime family still enabled and emboldened Lori to continue on with her red rum spree, which killed Tammy and their two grandchildren, niece and nephew. I 100% agree with you. They are the cult of Cox. They are the Cox mob, as far as I'm concerned. And this trial proved it to me, and it disgusts me. I think it's horrible. Just alleged defendant, just to be clear, we are not slashing anyone's tires for legal purposes. That was a joke. For real. I'm saying I'm not conspiring. I wouldn't announce it on here. That's what I'm saying. Just making sure all of the law enforcement watching. That was a joke. Don't do crime. I've never had any temptation to commit a crime. I prefer to work out my disagreements with people by having, conversations, and to try and do that in healthy ways. So I don't believe in manipulating people, and I certainly don't believe in conspiring against people. And I just, one of the things that I've said is that our family has this pattern of not talking to each other when things are going wrong, and not talking to each other about our shortcomings or our flaws. Thank you, Lisa. I agree with you. They shot him twice, guilty. We have this pattern of not communicating in healthy ways, or admitting when we're wrong, or talking openly about how somebody's behavior may have hurt someone else. It's all cover it up, pretend it didn't happen, talk about other things, adopt the official family story. And unfortunately, it sort of feels like my family hasn't learned anything from this horrible turn of events. It feels like talking about people instead of talking to people is still the MO of the family. And it's really, really unfortunate, but it further solidifies my position that I have chosen family now that I keep in my life, and I don't need the blood relatives that that do harmful things. So, Megan disagrees. I think evil can be inherited, explains mob and slave families. I think that you can be born with it. I think there's good evidence to suggest that psychopathy can be a trait that you're born with, but I think it can be. I think it can be inherited. But I also believe that whatever we inherit from our parents, it's our job to go then and do better. If we've inherited harmful relational patterns from our family, that's literally what I've tried to do in my life. When I became a parent, I started out parenting the way I was parented. And then I had a realization when my oldest daughter was about 7 years old that I did not want to be a controlling parent, and I did not want my kids to fear me. I wanted them to love me, but above that, I wanted them to know that I loved them. And not just that I only loved them if they fit certain criteria or if they checked certain boxes. And so I made a conscious effort to read and research and find other ways to do it better. And it was hard for me to do that. I had to confront hard truths, and it took me a really long time. It took me a lot of work and a lot of effort to change the unhealthy patterns and break the cycles in my family. And I'm still doing it. I'm still practicing it. And I'm not perfect at it. I still have a tendency to, want to feel like I'm being abandoned when I get rejected. That's a wound that comes up for me all the time, but I'm still working on healing it so that I don't then take that hurt and hurt other people with it. What advice would I give my past self? I would have trusted myself sooner, because I think I trusted what my family members said about me for way too long, and it kept me stuck for way too long. It takes a lot of strength, and it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of being alone. This is a good question. How does a golden child become a golden child? It happened in my family, not sure how that happened. Well, the golden child is typically the child who best exemplifies what the family values. And in this family, the Cox family, physical appearance was valued above almost everything else. And faithfulness to the church was valued above almost everything else. So when Lori when she married Charles, and Charles was converted to the religion, and he got baptized, and they went to the temple together, it sort of repaired all of the other marriages that Lori had sort of done wrong. And it gave her some clout within the family system, I believe. I think it is hard to charge somebody who is on death row and still in the appeals process. So I don't know if Charles is going to be charged, but I think that it would be difficult to do that. And he's got the death penalty. So I'm going to go and just answer a few questions over here. Thank you, Forever Wander. Breaking cycles is hard, but doable. Yes. And, I know that, sorry. Yes, I meant Chad. I'm so sorry. There's two Chas and there's two people with A names, and I do get them messed up, and I do apologize. I'm sorry. I want to answer a couple of these questions. I know there's a lot of them, so I'll get to as many as I can in the next 10 minutes, let's say. And then I need a break because it's been a long day. But I will be back. I'll be back first thing tomorrow morning. As soon as jury deliberation starts, we will have a video, we will have live chat, and I will be replaying some of the testimony that I think is important and also talking about some of the other evidence that I think is important to revisit. So yes, we're going to stop starring questions at this point. So if you have something that you think is urgent, you can always email me at askmegan@gmail.com. That's Megan with 2 E's. Kathy says, what do you think about the jury going home after 10 minutes? I honestly just think they were probably tired. Their brains were full. They needed a break. And so I hope that what happened is that they chose a 4-person and decided to come back fresh in the morning after getting a good night's sleep. So that's what I think about that. I'm not worried about that. I just think it was a long day. Did the judge go over the verdict form that has number 1, not guilty, number 2, guilty of charge 1, number 3, guilty of all charges with aggravating factors? There's always jury instructions plus a verdict form. He did go over the verdict form, but the aggravating factors were not on there yet because we're not to the sentencing phase or the aggravation phase yet. That comes next. So he did go over that. You either have to say 1 guilty or 2 not guilty to count 1. Mary Cat says, I say this frequently. I think Lori was essayed by her father while her mom did nothing. She has personality disorders with no empathy. I strongly suspect that as well, although we don't have any proof of it. But that's a speculation that a lot of people have had. And I do believe Janice has been very passive throughout her life and just sort of accepted whatever Mary does because she had the lifestyle she wanted. That is my opinion only. Chi-Town says, has anyone ever given thought to what Charles meant in his last text to Adam? What you do is up to you. Just curious of your thoughts. So Adam texted Charles and said, I'm going to put the pressure on Alex to see if he'll come and pick me up right now. And that's when Charles said, what you do is up to you. I think that what Charles meant was, he was focusing on getting help for Lori. They were focusing on trying to get her temple recommend taken away. Adam had some other plans. He was saying maybe a family dinner where we have an intervention type of situation. And I think Charles was just giving him leave to say, do whatever you think is best. And I think at that point, Charles had seen that Alex was at the house, knew they were up to something. This was, I think Charles was sort of like, this is go time. And I agree with the idea that Adam said that it's possible that Charles may have taken his phone in there with the intent to record the interaction. I think that's very possible. Jenny Allison, Megan, do you believe that Charles ever had the bat or acted like he would use it against Lori, Tylee, or Alex? I actually do believe that Tylee brought the bat out. I do believe that Charles took it away from her. I don't believe that he ever wielded it against Lori, Tylee, or Alex. I don't think he ever threatened with the bat. Crusha says, I wish Charles wouldn't have involved Adam. Yeah, but I understand his position being completely shut out by the family, and Adam was the only one taking his calls and answering his emails. So I understand him wanting to involve Adam and probably not realizing how much Adam was still affected by the family system. Sorry, just had to tell my dogs to chill out for a second. Kelly D says, I don't think Alex went back for the gun. I think he had it right away when he came out. I think they lied about some of that. I definitely think they lied about it. So many theories out there. I really need to think about what I think is most plausible now that I have some more information. I speculated about it a little bit this morning before court started. But again, I kind of want to go through it with Kresha because I think she probably has some details that I don't, and vice versa. I want to go through it without the benefit of chat. Not that I don't love you guys, but sometimes when you come in with a good point, it just derails my line of thinking and I can't get to the end of what I'm thinking. Lamisa, thanks for being here. The enmeshment and triangulation was so insane. Poor Uncle Charles. He was so alone out there. I agree. It was really, really sad. Kresha, did y'all hear the other day the bat was purchased while Charles was residing with the family? I heard it. While Charles was residing with the family. I don't remember hearing that, but I remember Tylee saying that she got the bat because she was staying at her Uncle Alex's alone and she needed something for self-defense. That's what I remember hearing Tylee say in her interview. I think they brought it out because Charles was unarmed. I think that's possible, but also the reason I have this theory about the bat is because of Lori wanting to bring in this video that Janice and Summer watched. If you remember, during Lori's opening statements, she listed the dates of several arguments between Charles and Tylee. I think that Lori recorded one of these arguments and showed the video to Janice and Summer to get them on board with the idea that Charles was terrorizing Tylee. And I think Lori coached Tylee to say, look, Charles has been stirring up these fights with you. You need to have your bat handy in case something ever happens. That's why I believe Tylee did have the bat. I don't believe that she made up that whole story that she told in the police office. I think she was influenced by Lori, but I don't think she made up everything about the bat. That's just my opinion. So there's that. And then my cat's name is Karen. Is the prosecutor allowed to watch social media? Yeah, the prosecutor can watch whatever she wants. I don't think she does. I think she related to us that she doesn't watch TV shows or any of that kind of stuff, that she just doesn't have time or brain space for it. So, she used her daughter, definitely, but I don't think Tylee lied about everything. Yeah, I agree with that. Crystal says, if she had shoes on, why did she drop the flip-flops after she bought them other than to put them on? That's what throws me off. I think so we saw this interaction with Lori at the Walgreens with the cashier. We see the cashier bringing out scissors to help her cut off the tags. Lori throws a pair of flip-flops on the floor. I think she kicked off her shoes, put on the flip-flops, and threw the shoes in the trash as she left. If I had been a detective seeing that video, I probably would have asked, hey, is that trash been emptied yet? I'd kind of like to go through the trash. Is it in the dumpster in the back? We'll take some trash bags back with us as evidence. That's probably what I would have done. Isabel says the character of someone that the evidence proves, and she has been convicted of 3 others, all related. I agree with that. That comes in as character. Lisa, thank you for the super sticker. Tylee fetching the purse never came up. That's true, because that was in Tylee's testimony. I don't remember Lori ever mentioning it. And so I think she probably wouldn't have wanted to bring that up, because that's pretty gross to send your daughter back in for a purse when you know that there is, her stepfather is laying on the floor. I do believe that Lori alienated Tylee from Charles. Mad Router, thanks for the sticker. New to the case, but how are her friends in the cult not held accountable when they were discussing them having demons being eliminated? Hopefully they will be held accountable. I appreciate that. Thank you. I hope they will be charged. Jennifer says, I flyer miles for you for Brandon's trial, or just when you need them. Oh, thank you so much, Jennifer. That's really kind of you. I really, really appreciate it. Kay Marie says, Megan, was there ever a pool party? I think there was. I think the landlord testified that neighbors were complaining about the noise from Lori's house. And we did hear a detective mention that they heard Lori say something about not being invited to the pool party, or that she wasn't inviting someone to the pool party. So we've had 2 different accounts now that it possibly did happen. I wouldn't put it past them. It's gross. Aang says, dissecting what the family's all about must be so difficult. It seems almost unreal. I do. I feel like I'm in sort of like upside down alternate reality. It's bizarre and it's crazy, but it's the only way that I can make sense of it for myself. And it's the only way that I can make peace with it and shut the door and move on. So thank you so much for the love and support that everybody is showing Kresha and me as well. I appreciate it. Mary Herbie, if the family had known she was capable of murdering or being complicit in murdering children, I'm sure they would have said something, but she lies so easily and so well. Yeah, the murder of adults, yeah, no problem. But kids, that's where we draw the line. Honestly, I just think I think the whole thing is disgusting. just the idea that like maybe it was Stacy's time to go. Just the idea that Joe Ryan, the world is better off without Joe Ryan. Like this whole line of thinking is disgusting and warped and sick. And that's why I want to call attention to it. It is not normal. We should not be normalizing this kind of justification for anything like this. It's gross. Forever Wander 03, do you think Chad will ever turn on Lori and give all the details, like for a reduced sentence to life in prison? I don't know. If he was offered life in prison instead of an execution, maybe he would, but I don't know if that's on the table or if it's even possible. I guess we'll find out, but I hope I never hear their names again after this is all over, because I'm sick of it. I'm done. Joel Roberts says, do you think that the other people that were witnesses were granted immunity for testifying in this case and the upcoming one? Melanie and Melanie Gibb, Melanie Pulowski and Melanie Gibb, and I believe Zulema were offered immunity in Idaho for testifying in that case. They have no immunity in Arizona. So that's my thought on that. Do you have any advice for dealing with the loneliness that comes with avoiding the negative behavior? Because eventually you have to distance yourself from the narc family and the flying monkeys. Yeah, the very, very first episode that I did on my podcast, April 8th, 2024, was how to get better at being alone. That was one of the first skills that I learned in my healing journey that helped me more than anything else. And even though it still hurts to be rejected by family members, it still sucks to be out here alone for the most part. There is so much peace that I have within myself, not having to deal with those dynamics. And those are not the people that I want to share my life with. And so learning how to be alone is difficult, but necessary. And I think that the more people who can learn to do that and do it in healthy ways, the better off we're going to be. Because a lot of our dysfunction comes from needing relationships and needing external validation. So learning to internally validate is important, and learning how to be alone is really important as well. And that's what my podcast and my healing is all about, is helping people learn how to do those things in healthier ways. I missed Crush's comment. I'm going to go back and learn. Yeah, it is difficult learning how to be alone. Lori C. Oh, thank you. AA from AA, a good friend from Web Sleuths, helping me with research. I really appreciate it. Sorry, I'm just reading because I know I missed one of Crush's. Oh yeah, according to Steve Cope, he called the Cox family a psychological hornet's nest. I 100% agree with that assessment. That is so true. My parents, so my dad is Janice's brother, Janice's younger brother. And I prefer not to involve them because they prefer not to be involved. And my daughter gets married this coming Sunday, not just, but this coming Sunday. It is a happy time for our family for those reasons. I don't think any of Lori's family was there today. I forgot to ask Joe Schmo, who was in the front row, but he said he believes it was just members of the public. He doesn't think it was family. We talked about this already. Breaking cycles is hard but doable. We already said that. Thank you. Thank you for the super stickers, everybody. Brandon's trial is scheduled to start pretty much right after this one. They're going to start sending out jury questionnaires, I believe, on the 21st. Final trial management conference will be on May 14th. Jury questionnaires go out on the 21st. They will meet on the 30th to go over the electronic questionnaires. And then live responses will be on the 29th at 1 p.m. And then they will hold the trial the week of June 2nd, the week of June 9th. The following week, the court is not in session. And then they've reserved the week of the 23rd as well for that case, which is longer than we've done in this trial. But it is coming up. I will keep you posted. I will be reporting. I will be live streaming just as I've done for this channel. I'm just not going to be in Arizona for that trial. I decided it is not healthy for me to be in the proximity of evil for so long. And I will be reporting from here because that is hard enough. And yes, thank you for posting Kresha's channel. Everybody, please support Kresha and her work. It is absolutely amazing what she does, all of her research. Again, I will be on Web Sleuths tonight. It's 10 o'clock Central. Steve Cope is Stacy's ex-husband, the father of Melanice. Stacy is the Cox's oldest daughter. And in their divorce documents, there is a lot of information about the Cox family. I will be bringing that into my discussion about Barry Cox. There is a lot of information there that has to do with this case and has to do with the family dynamic as well. Thank you to everyone who is sharing in the chat. I'm not going to show some of these personal things that people are sharing, but I want you to know that I see you and I'm with you. My heart is with you. And thank you to everyone in the chat who is so supportive of everyone who shares their personal stories here. This chat is a peaceful and kind place like 99.9% of the time. And I appreciate everything that you guys are sharing with each other and being kind to each other. I want to say, I love this, Mary Cat. Hurt people don't have to hurt others. I've come to hate that saying. Some of the kindest people have been terribly abused. It is our responsibility when we become adults to heal our emotional wounds and to heal the hurt that we've experienced so that we don't pass it on and hurt others. It is our responsibility for the generational trauma cycles to end with us. It is our responsibility to learn how to relate with people in healthy ways so that tragedies like this don't happen, and so that we're more capable of calling people out and of holding people accountable when they are acting in harmful ways with other family members. Thank you, Kresha. Love always wins. Justice for Charles Vallow. That is what we are all here for tonight. And thank you so much to everybody for caring so much about the family and the victims in this case. I will be on Web Sleuths tonight and then back tomorrow morning as soon as the jury comes in for more coverage. And I will be here until the very end. Please take care of yourselves, get some rest, and be good to yourselves above everything else. Take care.